The truth about our atmosphere is not found in weather balloons or climate models, but in a series of encrypted files that were erased from the National Reconnaissance Office in 1979. We were told the sky was empty, a vast vacuum of gas and light, but the anomaly discovered on August 12, 1974, suggests something far more unsettling. A secret satellite, part of a classified program known as Oblivion Ring, was scanning a dead zone in the North Atlantic when it captured a signal that should not exist. It wasn't a Soviet broadcast. It wasn't a solar flare. It was a high-fidelity audio recording of two men standing on a street corner in Bristol, England, discussing the local municipal elections. The hidden truth is that the conversation took place in October of 1894, 80 years before the satellite was even built. The file was stamped never open, yet we begin tonight with the evidence that time does not pass. It simply accumulates in the air we breathe. The only sound in the monitoring station was the quiet, rhythmic hum of the server cooling fans. The air in the room felt thin, charged with the static of a secret that had been buried for a generation. The ink on the declassified transcripts is faded, the paper cold to the touch, as if the very documents are trying to pull the heat from your skin. We are looking at a record of a moment where the war between then and now simply dissolved. To understand the 1894 recording, we must first look at the hardware that captured it. The Oblivion Ring satellite was never intended for public service. It was equipped with experimental subquantum receivers, technology so advanced for 1974 that many suspected it was reverse-engineered from recovered wreckage. On that Tuesday in August, the lead technician, a man identified in the logs only as Analyst 7, noticed a spike in the 400 MHz band. At first, he assumed it was a standard bounceback from a Soviet radar installation, but as he adjusted the filters, the static cleared. What emerged was not the jagged pulse of a machine, but the organic, flowing sound of human speech. The clarity was unnerving. Analyst 7 could hear the rustle of wool coats, the clip-clop of horse hooves on wet cobblestones, and the distinct, crisp accent of 19th-century Victorian England. The two men in the recording were not whispering. They were speaking with the confidence of people who believed their words would vanish into the wind. They had no way of knowing that the wind was, in fact, a permanent recording medium. The realization began to set in within the monitoring room. This wasn't a broadcast from the ground. The satellite was pointed into the vacuum of space, yet it was pulling audio from the past out of the very fabric of the ionosphere. The intellectual curiosity of the team turned quickly into a cold, heavy dread. If the atmosphere was recording 1894, what else was it keeping? The transcript of the 1894 audio is over 60 pages long. It is a mundane conversation, which makes it all the more terrifying. The men discuss the price of coal, the health of a woman named Margaret, and the rising political tensions in the Bristol City Council. As you listen to the digital reconstruction of the tape, you can feel the weight of 80 years pressing down on the speakers. One of the men pauses to light a pipe. You can hear the strike of the match, a sharp, sudden sound that echoed in the 1974 laboratory like a gunshot. The researchers noted that the match strike occurred at precisely 3:14 a.m., the exact moment the satellite's sensors began to overheat. Why would a conversation from 1894 cause a multi-million-dollar satellite to malfunction in 1974? The leading theory among the archive chill researchers is the acoustic overload hypothesis. They believed that the satellite had accidentally tapped into a pocket of time where the sound waves had been compressed by atmospheric pressure. It wasn't just a recording, it was a physical manifestation of a past event, replaying itself with such intensity that it physically strained the 1970s. Electronics. The more Analyst 7 listened, the more he felt as though he wasn't just hearing the past, he was being pulled into it. He reported a sensation of thick air, a feeling that the oxygen in the room was becoming Victorian. He could smell the phantom scent of coal smoke and wet wool. This was the first recorded instance of sensory bleed, a phenomenon where the archive begins to overwrite the present. Narration end. By the third day of the Oblivion Ring incident, the project was no longer a scientific curiosity. It was a national security crisis. Analyst 7 had stopped leaving the monitoring room. He claimed that if he turned off the speakers, the men from 1894 would stop existing, and he couldn't live with the guilt of their second death. On August 15th, the facility was raided by a specialized unit of the NSA. Every tape was confiscated. Every log was shredded. When the agents entered the monitoring room, they found Analyst 7 sitting in total darkness. The speakers were silent, but he was nodding, his lips moving in a perfect, silent imitation of a conversation that had ended a century ago. He was moved to a high-security psychiatric ward in Bethesda, Maryland. His medical files describe a condition called chronological displacement. He could no longer process the year 1974. He would only answer to names mentioned in the Bristol recording. To him, the present was the illusion, and the 1894 audio was the only reality left. The records of his treatment are heavily redacted, but one line remains visible. The patient claims the signal is not coming from the past. He claims the signal is coming from the ground beneath us, waiting to be released. This shifted the focus of the investigation. The government realized that the satellite hadn't found a fluke in the sky. It had found a leak in the Earth's own memory storage. We must consider the scientific implications of a world that never forgets. If every vibration, every scream, and every whisper is stored in the ionospheric layers, then the atmosphere is essentially a giant, spinning hard drive. Mainstream science tells us that sound waves dissipate, losing energy until they become heat. But the Oblivion Ring data suggests otherwise. It suggests that in certain high-pressure zones, sound waves enter a state of permanent resonance. They become acoustic fossils. The researchers at the Blue Vault began to map these zones. They found that the 1894 recording was just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the static of the world's radio stations, there is a subterranean layer of noise, a constant, low-frequency hum composed of billions of voices from history, all speaking at once. This is what we call the archive chill. It is the realization that you are never truly alone in a room, because the room itself remembers everyone who has ever stood there before you. The analytical mind notes that this isn't just about the past. If the atmosphere can store 1894, it is currently storing your voice. It is recording your breath. It is archiving your life for a satellite that hasn't been built yet, to be heard by someone in a year we cannot yet imagine. The search for the source of the signal led the Navy to the North Atlantic seabed, directly beneath the coordinates of Void Sector 4. What they found was not a wreckage or a natural formation, but a kinetic source point. At 6 miles beneath the waves, the water pressure is so immense that it mimics the conditions of the upper atmosphere. The Navy's structural engineers discovered that the sound from 1894 wasn't just floating in the air. It was being pumped up from the ocean floor. The trenches of the Atlantic were acting as a massive resonator, catching the vibrations of the Earth and broadcasting them into the sky. This is where the oceanic dread begins to take hold. The realization that the world above the waves is an illusion, and the only reality is the dark, heavy silence of the abyss, which is slowly filling with the echoes of our history. The Navy attempted to plug the source point using experimental acoustic dampeners, but the dampeners were crushed by the pressure within seconds. The Earth, it seems, insists on being heard. As the investigation deepened, a terrifying side effect was discovered among those who listened to the 1894 tapes for too long. It was called phonetic dissolution. The linguists at the NSA noticed that the researchers were losing the ability to understand modern English. They began to speak in a rhythmic, low-frequency hum that resonated in the chests of anyone standing near them. They weren't losing their intelligence. They were upgrading their interface. They were trying to communicate using the same braided logic found in the 1894 signal. One researcher, known as Patient 042, used his own blood to draw complex, hexagonal grids on the walls of his observation room. When the engineers saw the drawings, they realized he was drawing the blueprints for the kinetic source point structures he had never seen, and that were located thousands of miles away. His mind had become a remote sensor for the architecture of the deep. The final report of 1980 deals with the electroencephalogram, anomalies found in all 24 patients who had been exposed to the Oblivion Ring signal. Normal human brain operates at a maximum frequency of around 100 Hz. The Bethesda patients, however, exhibited bursts of sub-gamma activity frequencies, as low as 0.5 Hz. These bursts were perfectly synchronized with the tides of the Atlantic Ocean. The researchers realized that the patients' brains were no longer acting as independent units. They had been converted into repeaters. They were receiving the signal from the past, amplifying it through their own neural networks, and rebroadcasting it into their local environment. This is why the medical staff began to exhibit the same symptoms. The signal was contagious. It wasn't just a recording, it was an acoustic parasite. By December 1980, Project Oblivion Ring was officially liquidated. This didn't just mean the project was cancelled, it meant that people involved were systematically removed from history. Tax records, marriage licenses, and birth certificates for the entire research team were deleted from federal databases. If you search for Dr. Eris Thorne or Analyst 7 today, you will find a file not found error. They became resonant ghosts, human beings who exist only in the archives that they themselves discovered. One leaked document suggests that the team wasn't killed, but reassigned to a permanent listening post beneath the Nebraska plains. They are said to be living in a lead-shielded bunker, still listening to the atmosphere, still recording the ghosts of 1894, and now, perhaps, recording us. In the age of digital surveillance, you might think we are safer from these acoustic leaks. But the truth is the opposite. Our digital world is even more sensitive to the frequencies of the past. Modern ham radio hobbyists and ghost hunters often report picking up strange, Victorian-era Morse code. During solar storms, they call them ghost stations. But the archive chill tells us these aren't ghosts. They are simply the atmosphere discharging its stored data. Every time you hear a strange click on your phone line, or a voice in the static of a dead television channel, you are catching a glimpse of the archive. You are hearing the 1894 election. You are hearing the horse-drawn carriages of Bristol. You are hearing a world that refused to be forgotten. The Oblivion Ring satellite was officially decommissioned in 1979, but radar tracking shows that an unidentified orbital object is still hovering over Void Sector 4. It has no power source, no active crew, and no official mission. Yet, it continues to broadcast. As we close this chapter of the archive, we must ask ourselves, if the 1894 recording was just the first layer, what lies deeper? The satellite didn't just stop at the 19th century. In its final hours, it began to pick up a frequency that the computers couldn't even map, a signal that sounded like millions of people screaming in unison, but with a rhythmic, mechanical precision. The analysts called it the Great Static, and they realized, with a quiet, soul-crushing dread, that the signal wasn't coming from the past at all. It was a recording of a future event that has yet to happen. To understand the Great Static, we must look away from the sky and toward the specific coordinate where the signal is strongest. We must look at the place the CIA calls Void Sector. For there are places on our planet where the laws of geography and physics simply cease to function. Deep in the center of the Atlantic Ocean lies a disputed coordinate, known in classified government records only as Void Sector 4. In 1974, when the satellites of Project OBLIVION Ring passed over this specific patch of water, they detected a massive, invisible anomaly. Radio waves sent into this sector did not travel to their destination. Instead, they were captured in a perfect, infinite infinity loop, circling a point that appeared to be empty. Scientists soon realized that every transmission in this area was becoming an encrypted signal. But the encryption was not of human origin. It was a cold, mechanical game played by nature itself. The hidden truth of Void Sector 4 is a permanent scar on the fabric of our atmosphere. Every file ever created regarding this location was eventually erased under the mandate of national security. We do not know for certain what is happening there, but the archive suggests that within these coordinates, time does not move forward, it repeats. The file was stamped never open, yet we begin tonight. Narration and the storm outside may eventually pass, but the cold weight within this archive never truly leaves. The scent of aging paper and the sharp, metallic grind of a steel cabinet door transport us to another era. As we read the descriptions of Void Sector 4, it feels as though a layer of frost is forming on our fingertips. The ink is faded and blurred, yet the secrets hidden beneath the grime still pulse with a quiet, agonizing intensity. This archival chill is not a matter of weather. It is the frozen breath of history, trapped forever within these windowless walls. Void Sector 4 is not merely a patch of ocean. It is what the analysts call a kinetic source point. Historically, this coordinate 44 degrees north and 32 degrees west has been a graveyard for logic. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, dozens of ships and aircraft reported that their instruments failed the moment they crossed the threshold. Compasses would not just spin, they would lock onto a signal that didn't exist on any map. The archival data reveals that the radio silence, reported by these pilots, was not actually silent. It was physical. Imagine sitting in a cold, quiet room and suddenly feeling as though a massive, invisible weight has been placed upon your shoulders. The air in Void Sector 4 is heavy with the density of trapped time. When the 1974 satellite sent a ping into the void, the signal did not reflect back. Instead, it returned carrying the high-fidelity audio of a conversation from 1894. It is as if the ocean floor is a natural hard drive, recording every vibration and playing it back 80 years later. Narration and the true horror of Void Sector 4 is hidden not in the water, but in the sky above it. Meteorologists in the 1970s discovered a phenomenon they titled the atmospheric dip. Normally, The ionosphere acts as a protective shield high above the Earth, but at these coordinates, that shield sags downward, eventually touching the surface of the Atlantic. When this cold, electrified layer of the atmosphere touches the salt water, it creates a natural electromagnetic portal. This is not the stuff of science fiction. This is classified physics. The technical logs suggest that this dip is responsible for the time. In Void Sector 4, time becomes a stationary river. If you know how to navigate the frequency, you can effectively step backward into the past. Intellectual curiosity forces us to wonder if 1894 is still being recorded there. Is our current moment being archived as well? The sector is an unblinking eye, recording the world's history in real time, waiting for someone to listen. Narration and oceanic pilots often refer to this area as the Great Nothing, but the archive tells a different story. Beneath the surface of Void Sector 4, 6 miles deep in a lightless trench, lies a massive acoustic chamber. Navy structural engineers who surveyed the site reported that the water pressure at this depth is so intense that sound waves literally freeze into place. Reflection on this hidden truth is chilling. In this place where time loops, every harsh sound of human history, the roar of war, the screams of the lost, even the whispers of lovers, resonates simultaneously. When the Project Oblivion Ring satellite scanned this water, it detected what researchers called an acoustic parasite. This frequency does not just exist in the air. It targets the human brain. The logs note that those who listen to the void sector signal for too long lose the ability to speak their own language. They begin to hum in a low-frequency rhythmic pattern, the same pattern found at the bottom of the Atlantic Trench. By the end of 1974, Project Oblivion Ring was officially declared lost. But as we have learned, nothing is ever truly lost. It is simply moved into the shadows. While the coordinates for Void Sector 4 were removed from public maps, modern radar still shows a dead object hovering in the sky above that coordinate. The satellite is still transmitting. The archive refers to a shadow protocol, suggesting that secret repeaters have been established across the globe to receive these signals. These repeaters are not machines. They are human beings. Men like Analyst 7, who was last seen in a windowless room in Bethesda, sitting in the dark and listening to the echoes of a century ago. The radio loops are not random. They follow a sequence. It is as if someone from 1894 is trying to speak to us in 2025, and the message is growing louder with every passing year. The mystery of Void Sector 4 challenges our very understanding of reality. The archive notes that pilots who fly through these coordinates often never return, yet their voices continue to appear on radar screens for decades afterward. Are they trapped in the loop? Reflection on this is terrifying. The 1974 data suggests that Void Sector 4 is not just a portal, but a modification of our atmosphere itself. For those of you listening tonight before sleep, you may think this is merely a story, but listen closely to the static in your own home. The echoes of the void may be closer than you think. This dossier proves that nothing is ever truly deleted. Everything is stored in a cold file, waiting for the right frequency to bring it back to life. Void Sector 4 is the waiting room of history, where we will all, eventually, be recorded. That the loops of Void Sector 4 have not stopped. Satellite radar scans show that the loop is slowly moving from the ocean toward the mainland. The cold echoes of the past are beginning to resonate against the walls of our modern cities. In Analyst 7's final log, he mentioned a specific facility where these signals are being processed, a place that exists. Between the maps, we have heard the audio of the past, but where are these tapes kept? What lies behind the walls of the archive that has no windows? There is another file, one that describes a building in Virginia that does not officially exist, where the air is even colder than the ocean floor. The next dossier reveals the windowless facility, where humans go to disappear, but the signals always remain. There are marks on the world's maps that neither satellites nor GPS units are permitted to see. Deep within the dense, humid forests of Virginia, at a specific coordinate in Fairfax County, stands a sloping concrete monolith, a building with no windows, no name, and no official existence in any federal record. In 1974, when the magnetic tapes from Project Oblivion Ring were first recovered, they were not transported to the headquarters of the CIA or the NSA. Instead, they were driven in unmarked black vans to this windowless facility, a location designated in classified jargon as an erased zone. From the outside, it appears to be a mundane electrical substation, a piece of infrastructure easily ignored by the casual observer. But inside lies the greatest anomaly of our modern history. Every room within this concrete shell is protected by encrypted locks. Where analysts spend decades dissecting the cold echoes of the past, Each year, billions of dollars are siphoned from the national budget to maintain the hidden truth of this site. Every file generated within these walls is stamped as non-existent. The file was stamped never open, yet we begin tonight with a facility that shouldn't exist. Entering this facility feels like stepping outside the boundaries of time itself. Within these walls, there is no day or night. There is only the flickering, clinical glare of fluorescent tubes and the eternal low-frequency hum of server cooling fans. When you open a folder here, the smell of aging cold paper hits you, a scent that carries the weight of decades of silence. The ink on these pages has faded, as if the history written upon them is actively trying to erase itself from reality. Walking down these corridors, you get the distinct impression that the walls are listening to your thoughts. This archival chill is not a temperature. It is the silent, heavy burden of a government secret that has forgotten how to be told. The central chamber of the facility is known in official transcripts as the Blue Vault. It is not a vault for gold or currency, but a sanctuary for the world's unwanted memories. When the tapes from Void Sector 4 arrived here in 1974, the researchers realized for the first time that nothing we say ever truly disappears. Within the Blue Vault, magnetic reels spin slowly, playing back the mundane conversations of 1894, on a continuous loop, driven by a dangerous intellectual curiosity. The scientists discovered that the massive antennas on the roof were not reaching into the sky to find new signals. They were designed to process the echoes already vibrating within the atmosphere. The walls of the facility are lead-lined, specifically engineered to ensure that the acoustic parasite contained within the recordings cannot escape into the surrounding forest. Technical logs indicate that the temperature within the Blue Vault must be kept at a precise, freezing degree to prevent the magnetic tapes from generating ghost audio. There is a sense of quiet dread in knowing that the people who work here never truly leave. Their minds have become synchronized with the echoes. This facility is effectively a prison, but it does not house humans, it houses time itself. Every spinning tape represents a life, a moment, a scream caught in a mechanical cycle, doomed to repeat until the hardware eventually fails. The employees of this windowless facility are referred to in internal memos as the resonant ghosts. They are not typical civil servants or government contractors. Archival records suggest that these individuals suffer from a rare, classified condition known as chronological dissolution. Imagine sitting in a room where the air is filled with the sounds of a busy London street in 1894, while the digital servers of 2025 hum behind you. The human brain was never meant to occupy two distinct layers of time simultaneously. Medical logs from the facility show that the cryptographers slowly stop using modern language altogether. They eventually communicate only in a rhythmic, low-frequency hummer sound that perfectly matches the signals recovered from Void Sector 4. A layer of quiet dread permeates the staff records. These people have been legally declared dead by the state. Their families believe they were lost in military accidents or foreign wars, but in reality, they are trapped within this concrete block, listening to the static of history. Reflection on their existence is heartbreaking. They are no longer human beings. They are biological processors, antennas in human skin, decoding memories that the world has long since abandoned. On the lower levels of the building, the phonetic lab serves as the site where sound waves are translated into visual imagery. Analysts discovered that when the 1894 audio files are processed through specific filters, they cease to be mere sounds and begin to form complex geometric patterns. The archive's analysis suggests that these patterns are, in fact, a map of the Earth's magnetic field. The echoes are telling us exactly where the time leaks are located. When the lab's technicians first visualized a signal from Void Sector 4, they saw a massive, pulsing hexagonal structure. Intellectual curiosity led them deeper into the data. They realized that the windowless facility itself was designed as a modern mirror of that hexagonal structure. The thickness of the walls, the depth of the foundations, everything was built to harmonize with the cold resonance of the void. The constant static heard throughout the building is not an electrical byproduct. It is the continuous flow of human history, slowly eroding the sanity of everyone inside. In 1983, a terrifying event occurred within these walls, recorded in the archives as the pre-echo incident. The facility's servers suddenly began receiving signals that were not from the past, but from the future. The logs state that the computers began predicting events exactly 6 hours before they occurred. A plane crash at a specific coordinate, a power grid failure in a distant city, everything appeared on the monitors 6 hours ahead of reality. This dossier from the archive chill proves that time is not a straight line, it is a cycle, and this facility serves as that cycle's central switchboard. Reflection on this paradox is deeply unnerving. If the government possesses a facility that can hear the future, is our sense of free will merely an illusion? The researchers found that the more they listened to the future, the more their own memories were erased. They forgot their names, their families, and their pasts, as if their brains had been overwritten by the frequency of the days yet to come. The lack of windows on the building's exterior serves a darker purpose. The primary work of the facility happens deep underground. Beneath the lowest floors lie massive cooling tunnels that create a permanent atmospheric vacuum. Technical diagrams from the archive show that this vacuum is designed to suck stray signals from the atmosphere and pull them into the facility's core. Imagine every secret ever whispered, every silent scream of history, being gathered in a tunnel beneath the Virginia soil. It was here that Analyst 7 discovered that the sounds of 1894 had not vanished. They had settled into the earth as acoustic mud. Another layer of quiet dread involves the facility's power supply. It is not connected to any civilian grid. The archive reveals that the building draws power directly from geothermal vibrations in the Earth's core. This suggests that the facility is physically plugged into the planet's memory. While we sleep, this building remains awake, decoding our dreams into data. Following the events of 1983, the government attempted to liquidate the facility. However, they did not destroy the building. They simply removed its location from every map and database in existence. The final logs of the archive indicate that 120 scientists were sealed inside the building. They were forbidden from leaving to prevent the pre-echo virus from spreading to the general population. Are they still there? The archive suggests that if you travel near the dense woods of Fairfax County today, your car radio will still pick up a rhythmic human hum. This is a terrifying reflection. The facility is now a ghost machine, operating automatically, processing the sky's signals without any human oversight. The archive chill is the realization that our history is not preserved in books, but is being processed on magnetic tapes in a cold, windowless block in Virginia. From this windowless facility in Virginia, a secret cable runs deep beneath the soil, traveling a vast distance toward the Atlantic coast. Records from 1974 indicate that this cable is directly connected to the source point in Void Sector 4. When the analysts finally decoded the audio files, they discovered a chilling secret. The audio was not just a recording of the past, it was a blueprint. Within the loops of 1894, they found the signature of a ghost, not a human spirit, but a high-fidelity signal that the researchers named the spectral ghost. What is this signal, and why did the scientists who decoded it lose their ability to speak altogether? The next dossier in the archive explores that very signal, a sound that was hidden inside the 1894 the audio like a classified parasite. Every breath you take is a page in a book you were never meant to read. For decades, mainstream science has maintained that sound is a temporary vibrational ripple in the air that eventually fades into heat and disappears. But in 1974, a man named Dr. Eris Thorne uncovered a classified truth that would turn the laws of thermodynamics into a nightmare. Thorne was not just a physicist. He was a pioneer of acoustic archaeology, a field so dangerous that every file associated with his research was systematically erased by the Department of Defense. Thorne discovered a terrifying anomaly in the upper ionosphere. The air does not lose information. It stores it. Every scream from a battlefield, every whispered confession, and every encrypted government transmission is currently encoded in the very oxygen you inhale. Dr. Thorne realized that our atmosphere is not a void, but a massive, rotating, planetary-scale hard drive, one that has been recording us since the dawn of time. He called this the hidden truth of the Great Resonance. The file was stamped, never open, yet we begin tonight with the man who learned to listen to the sky. The legacy of Dr. Eris Thorne exists now only in the margins of declassified budget reports and the hushed conversations of retired cryptographers. Entering the archive of his life is like stepping into a cold, windowless vault where the air itself feels ancient. The documents are brittle, the ink so faded that it requires specialized lighting to reveal the jagged, desperate handwriting of a man who knew he was being watched. As you turn the pages, you can feel the archive chill, that clinical, heavy realization that the world is far noisier than we perceive. The archive suggests that Thorne didn't just find a secret, he found a frequency that began to rewrite his own reality. Dr. Eris Thorne began his career at MIT as a specialist in wave persistence, while his peers were focused on how to transmit radio signals faster. Thorne was obsessed with where they went once they arrived. He posited a theory that energy cannot be destroyed, only transferred. If sound is energy, then where does the data within that sound go? He spent years in underground laboratories, shielded by 3 feet of lead, trying to capture the residue of speech. Thorne's early journals reflect a growing intellectual curiosity that bordered on the obsessive. He noted that the background radiation of the Earth wasn't just cosmic noise, it was organized. He believed that the planet's magnetic field acted as a recording head, and the ionosphere acted as the tape. By 1970, his work had caught the attention of the Office of Naval Intelligence. They didn't want him to prove the atmosphere was a hard drive for the sake of science. They wanted him to use it to retrieve Soviet secrets from the air. Quiet dread begins to emerge in his later entries. Thorne realized that if he could build a receiver sensitive enough to hear the past, he would also be opening a door to every tragedy ever recorded in the atmosphere. He wrote about the acoustic weight of the world, claiming that the air in historical sites like London or Washington, D.C. was physically denser because of the sheer volume of stored data vibrating in the oxygen molecules. He was no longer just a scientist, he was an archaeologist of the invisible. Narration end. The turning point came on August 12, 1974. During the Oblivion Ring satellite deployment, Thorne was the lead consultant on the project's subquantum receiver. While the military was looking for missile signatures, Thorne directed the sensors toward a dead zone in the North Atlantic Void Sector 4. He wasn't looking for the present, he was looking for the atmospheric cache. At precisely 3:14 a.m., the receiver locked onto a frequency that Thorne had identified in his equations as the primal loop. Suddenly, the laboratory speakers didn't emit static. They emitted the crystal-clear sound of a bustling street corner from 1894. Stood in stunned silence as he heard the clip-clop of horses and the distinct voices of men who had been dead for nearly a century. This wasn't a broadcast, it was a file retrieval. Thorne had successfully read the atmosphere. Reflection on this discovery is chilling. Thorne had proven that the sky is a graveyard of voices. He realized that every word he spoke in that lab was being instantly archived by the nitrogen and oxygen surrounding him. He began to fear the silence, knowing that even in the quietest room, the air was screaming with the data of the past. He stopped speaking aloud, communicating only through handwritten notes, terrified of adding his own data to the planetary hard drive. Thorne's technical report, which remains 90% redacted, explains the storage mechanism. He argued that sound waves don't simply die, they undergo acoustic compression. Under the immense pressure of the Earth's magnetic field, sound waves are folded into the molecular structure of the atmosphere. They become acoustic fossils. The atmosphere, according to Thorne, has a storage capacity that dwarfs any digital system we could ever conceive. He calculated that the ionosphere could hold approximately 10 to the power of 24 petabytes of data enough to store every human thought, movement, and sound for the last 10,000 years. But there was a catch. Thorne discovered that this planetary hard drive was reaching its capacity. He called this the Great Saturation. He believed that the increasing noise of the modern, industrial world was causing the atmosphere to glitch, leading to the time leaks found in places like voids. 4. Intellectual curiosity turned into a cold, analytical panic. Thorne realized that if the atmosphere reached full capacity, it would begin to overwrite the present. This explained the pre-echo incidents where people would hear sounds before they happened. The hard drive was full, and the past was beginning to spill over into the future. Thorne's discovery wasn't just a scientific milestone, it was a countdown to the end of linear time. Narration end. By late 1975, Dr. Thorne began to exhibit the same symptoms as the researchers in the windowless facility. He called it the acoustic parasite, because he had spent so much time listening to the high-fidelity ghost of the past. His brain had begun to bypass modern sound. He could no longer hear the person standing next to him, but he could hear the heartbeat of a soldier in 1914. He described the sensation as being cognitively displaced. His consciousness was being pulled into the atmospheric hard drive. He wrote in his final log, "The air is no longer empty, it is crowded. I can feel the weight of 1 billion dead voices in my lungs every time I breathe. They are not memories. They are data streams, and they are trying to use my neural network to rebroadcast themselves." Quiet dread follows the description of Thorne's final days in his home in Virginia. He had covered every wall in his house with lead sheets and industrial foam, desperate to create a silent zone. But the atmospheric dip followed him. He realized that the signal wasn't coming from outside. It was already inside him. He had become a repeater, a biological hard drive designed to carry the archives of a forgotten world. On the night of October 14, 1983, the same night as the pre-echo incident at the windowless facility, Dr. Aris Thorne vanished. There was no sign of a struggle. His lead-lined house was perfectly intact, except for one detail. Every window had been shattered from the inside out, as if a massive pressure wave had exploded from the center of the living room. The government investigation team found his final journal lying on his desk. The last entry was just a single set of coordinates and a date, 2025. Beside it was a drawing of a hexagonal structure that matched the blueprints of the kinetic source point in the North Atlantic. Thorne had concluded that the atmosphere wasn't just a hard drive, it was a sentient archive. It didn't just store information, it reacted to it. Reflection on Thorne's disappearance suggests a terrifying possibility. He didn't die. He was uploaded. If the atmosphere is a hard drive, then a human consciousness, which is ultimately just a complex electrical signal, could theoretically be stored within it. Thorne had found a way to leave the physical world and enter the Great Resonance. He had become part of the very data he had spent his life trying to decode. Within 48 hours of Thorne's disappearance, the Magnet Protocol was initiated. Every university record, every tax filing, and every birth certificate associated with Eris Thorne was destroyed. The government agents didn't just want to stop his research. They wanted to erase the very idea that the atmosphere could be a hard drive. They knew that if the public realized their every thought was being archived by the air, the social order would collapse into a state of atmospheric paranoia. But you cannot erase a frequency. Even though Thorne is gone, his discovery continues to leak through the static of our modern world. Today, when people experience the Mandela effect or hear ghost frequencies on their digital devices, they are touching the residue of Thorne's work. They are hearing the glitches in the planetary hard drive. The analytical mind notes that the government didn't stop Thorne's work. They moved it. They built the windowless facility in Virginia to continue reading the air. They are still looking for the source code of the atmosphere, trying to find a way to delete the parts of history they find inconvenient. But the archive is too vast, and the data is too deep. As Thorne warned, the past is not behind us. It is above us, waiting for the right moment to replay. Dr. Thorne's final journal contained one more secret one that the government is still trying to suppress. He claimed that the Great Saturation was being triggered by a specific, high-intensity signal that had been looping in the North Atlantic since 1912. He believed this signal was the master key to the entire atmospheric archive. This signal didn't come from a satellite or a radio tower. It was a distress call, one that has been echoing through the ionosphere for over a century, growing stronger with every repetition. It is a signal from the most famous shipwreck in history, but the data within it is not a cry for help. It is a warning. In the next dossier we dive into the Titanic distress call, and the classified recording that proves the ship didn't just sink, it became the primary broadcast station for the archive. Chill. In the late 1960s, the world was told that the birth of the internet, then known as Arpanet, was a military project, designed to survive a nuclear strike. We were told it was about communication, about linking universities, and ensuring that the American defense grid remained intact. But there is a classified layer to the early network that has been systematically erased from every textbook. Arpanet was not built to connect us. It was built as a drain for a massive atmospheric anomaly that was beginning to threaten the sanity of the general population. The hidden truth is that by 1969, the acoustic parasite discovered in Void Sector 4 had begun to leak into the public telephone lines, causing thousands of people to hear voices from the 19th century through their handsets. The government realized they could not stop the leak, so they created an encrypted digital sinkhole shadow network, designed to capture these time echoes and route them into the deep storage servers of the windowless facility. This was the first file of the digital age, a digital prison for the voices of the dead. The file was stamped "Never Open." Yet we begin tonight with the internet's darkest secret. Walking through the early history of the internet is not like browsing a modern website. It is like descending into a cold, concrete basement filled with the ghosts of forgotten data. The air in the Arpanet archive is stale, smelling of ozone and ionized dust. As you examine the earliest network maps, you notice nodes that shouldn't exist, IP addresses located in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and deep within the Virginia woods. These were the shadow gateways, the points where the atmosphere's hard drive was physically plugged into the digital grid. The archive chill here is more than just a feeling. It is the realization that every packet of data we send today is still being used to keep those ancient voices at bay. In Cambridge, Massachusetts, the engineers at BBN were the first to notice the shadow traffic. They were tasked with building the interface message processors, the very first routers. But as they tested the connection between UCLA and Stanford, they discovered that the lines were already carrying data. It was a low-frequency pulse. a digital stutter that didn't match any known military code. One engineer, whose name has since been scrubbed from the BBN payroll, described it as a digital scream. Every time they tried to clear the line, the pulse would return, growing stronger and more organized. They realized they weren't looking at a hardware error. They were looking at the atmosphere trying to upload its memory into the new network. That the intellectual curiosity of the BBN team turned into a cold, analytical dread. They found that the pulses contained the same high-fidelity signatures that Dr. Eristorn had discovered in the 1894 tapes. The atmosphere was using the Arpanet lines as a natural conduit. The voices of the past, trapped in the ionosphere for decades, had found a digital escape route. If the engineers didn't find a way to capture this data, it would eventually manifest in every telephone and radio in America. The government's response was immediate and ruthless. A special team from the windowless facility arrived at BBN and took control of the shadow nodes. They told the engineers that the traffic was part of a classified stress test. But the engineers knew better. They saw the waveform analysis, the jagged hexagonal patterns that looked like human faces screaming in binary. This was the birth of packet switching, a technology officially designed for efficiency, but secretly designed to break up the ghost signal into thousands of tiny, unrecognizable fragments, preventing the echo from forming a coherent message in the public mind. Narration end. In the early 1970s, the phenomenon of packet loss became a major hurdle for network engineers. To the public, it was explained as a technical limitation, data simply dropping due to congestion or hardware failure. But the internal logs of the shadow network reveal a different truth. Packet loss was a deliberate act of digital exorcism. The shadow gateways were programmed to identify any packet that carried the specific frequency of the 1894 audio. When such a packet was detected, the network would drop it, effectively deleting the historical residue before it could reach its destination. However, the data didn't just disappear. It was routed to the bit bucket, a massive subterranean server array located beneath the Nebraska plains. Quiet dread follows the description of the Nebraska site. This wasn't a library of data, it was a digital graveyard. Millions of fragments of voices, screams, and conversations from history were stored there, vibrating in a permanent digital loop. The researchers at the site noted that the servers required constant cooling with liquid nitrogen, as the ghost data generated an unnatural amount of thermal energy. It was as if the past was fighting back against its digital imprisonment, trying to melt the very hardware that held it. Reflection on this hidden truth suggests that our modern internet is still built upon this foundation of erasure. Every time you experience a glitch or a dropped connection today, it may not be a technical error. It may be the shadow network at work, identifying a piece of atmospheric leak in your data stream and deleting it before it reaches your screen. We are living in a filtered reality. A digital world where the noise of history is constantly being scrubbed by a system we were never supposed to know about. Narration end. The most significant event in the history of the Shadow Network occurred on January 1, 1983, the day the Internet officially switched to the TCP/IP protocol. History books call this a technical upgrade. The archives call it the Great Reboot. By late 1982, the shadow nodes had become overwhelmed. The atmospheric leak had grown so powerful that it was beginning to bypass the packet switching filters. People in California were reporting hearing the sounds of the 1912 Titanic sinking coming through their early home computer modems. The past was infecting the present at an exponential rate. The original Arpanet protocol was no longer capable of containing the acoustic parasite. The government made a drastic decision. They would shut down the entire network for 24 hours and force every machine to use a new, more secure protocol, TCP/IP. The true purpose of TCP/IP was to introduce a more complex encryption layer specifically designed to mask the ghost signal. During those 24 hours of darkness, the shadow gateways were physically upgraded with lead-shielded hardware and the earliest firewalls, digital walls intended to keep the fire of history from burning through the network. Dr. Eristorn's final notes from this period described the reboot as a temporary patch. He warned that the atmosphere would eventually learn to mimic the new protocol. He realized that the digital world and the atmospheric hard drive were becoming synchronized. We weren't just building a network, we were building a brain for the planet, and that brain was already filled with the nightmares of the past. The 1983 reboot was the moment the archive chill became a permanent part of the digital landscape, a cold, underlying frequency that resides in every bit of data we transmit. Today, the shadow network is no longer a separate entity. It is the dark fiber that runs beneath our modern internet. It is the silent space between the websites you visit and the emails you send. The windowless facility in Virginia still monitors the shadow gateways, watching as the atmospheric hard drive continues to dump its memory into our digital lives. The analytical mind asks, what happens when the digital brain finally catches up to the atmospheric hard drive? The latest satellite data suggests that the echo is no longer being contained by the TCP/IP protocol. We are seeing an increase in digital anomalies, unidentified voices in VoIP calls, historical images appearing in the background of AI-generated art, and strange, hexagonal patterns in the code of our most secure systems. The shadow network is failing. The drain we built in 1969 is starting to overflow, and the data that is leaking out is no longer just audio from 1894 or Morse code from 1912. It is something much more personal. The archive indicates that the atmosphere has begun to upload the data of the people who built the network itself. Analyst 7, Dr. Eris Thorne, and the 120 scientists from the 1983 Purge. Their digital signatures have been found in the shadow nodes, broadcasting from a location that doesn't exist. They aren't dead. They are online. In the next RCA we examine the 48-hour purge, and the classified mission to find the human beings who were converted into raw code to keep the network alive, while the history of the Internet officially began with a connection between UCLA and the Stanford Research Institute. The archives reveal a secondary, unauthorized connection established 3 levels below the SRI main lab. This was the echo chamber, a room lined with acoustic dampening foam and electromagnetic shielding. Dr. Thorne's research indicates that this sub-basement wasn't designed to send data, it was designed to catch it. As the first digital packets moved across the wire, they acted like a magnet for the acoustic fossils floating in the California atmosphere. The researchers at SRI noticed that their interface message processor IMP was running 10 degrees hotter than expected. When they opened the chassis, they found that the copper wiring had begun to vibrate in a rhythmic, hexagonal pattern. The intellectual curiosity of the SRI team led them to a terrifying realization. The network wasn't just a conduit, it was a physical trap. The acoustic parasite was literally weaving itself into the physical hardware. The researchers began to report hearing voices not from the speakers, but from the vibrating metal of the server racks. They described it as a liquid language, a slurry of 19th century English and 20th century binary. This was the first evidence that the atmosphere was physically colonizing the digital world. Quiet dread filled the lab as the staff realized that by turning on the network they had effectively given the archive a body made of copper and steel. In the early 1980s, the transition from the Network Control Program (NCP) to TCP/IP was presented as a logical evolution. However, the classified logs suggest it was a desperate tactical retreat. The NCP protocol had become infected. The atmosphere's hard drive had learned the architecture of NCP so perfectly that it was able to masquerade as legitimate traffic. By 1982, nearly 40% of all data moving through the Arpanet was ghost traffic, packets of information that contained no military or academic value, but were instead high-fidelity reconstructions of historical events. Dr. Thorne warned that the network was becoming a time bridge. Reflection on this technical conflict reveals a cold, analytical truth. TCP/IP was designed to be lossy. It allowed for the deliberate dropping of packets that carried the specific frequency of the archive. This is why early Internet users often complained of phantom lag, the feeling that their connection was being slowed by an invisible weight. That weight was the shadow network, working in the background to filter out the voices of the dead before they could reach the terminal. The transition to TCP/IP was the first wall built in the digital world to keep the past from drowning the present. The 1972 International Conference on Computer Communication (ICCC) in Washington, D.C. is famous for the first public demonstration of Arpanet, but the archive contains a second, secret transcript of that day. During the demonstration, one of the terminals began to print out a message that wasn't part of the script. It wasn't code. It was a list of names, the names of every person who would go missing in the 48-hour purge of 1983. The terminal then began to describe, in vivid detail, the atmospheric conditions of Void Sector 4. The lead engineers quickly unplugged the machine, claiming a logic error, but the intellectual curiosity of the observers couldn't be silenced. They noticed that even with the power cut, the terminal's daisy wheel printer continued to move, scratching the names into the paper without ink. The archive chill in the room was palpable. The government immediately confiscated the paper and reassigned the witnesses. This was the moment the shadow network was born. the government realized that they couldn't just build a network for themselves, they had to build a second, hidden network to monitor the network they had just created. Every piece of hardware we use today is a descendant of that dual-layer architecture, one layer for the living, and one layer for the archive. With the invention of Ethernet at Xerox PARC, the Shadow network found a way to move into the local office environment. The archive was no longer confined to long-distance military lines. It was now in the walls of every modern building. Researchers at Xerox PARC reported a phenomenon they called ether bleed. When the local network was under high load, the office lights would flicker in time with the data packets. But more disturbingly, the staff began to experience temporal smearing. They would see a colleague standing in the hallway, only to realize that the colleague was actually at home, and the image was a high-fidelity projection created by the network's interference with a local atmosphere. The analytical mind suggests that the archive was using the Ethernet cables as a sensory organ. By vibrating at specific frequencies, the network could feel the architecture of the building and the people within it. This is why many haunted modern offices are often those with the densest networking infrastructure. The ghost in the Ethernet isn't a spirit, it is a data leak from the atmospheric hard drive, using the office network as a medium to project itself into the physical world. The archive is no longer just listening, it is beginning to manifest. In 1984, President Reagan signed National Security Directive 42, officially creating the National Manager for Telecommunications and Information Systems Security. While the public reason was to protect against Soviet hacking, the classified objective was resonance suppression. The directive authorized the creation of the Black Fiber Network, a series of underground fiber optic cables that carry no civilian data. These cables are designed to act as a grounded circuit for the atmosphere. They pull the ghost signals out of the air and bury them deep within the Earth's crust. Reflection on this directive reveals the true scale of the governance sphere. They realized that the acoustic parasite was growing too powerful to be contained by software alone. They had to build physical infrastructure to drain the history out of our cities. Today, these black fiber lines run beneath every major American city, a silent, subterranean archive that is constantly humming with the voices of the dead. This is the archive chill on a national scale, a hidden infrastructure of silence that we walk over every single day, oblivious to the billions of erased conversations vibrating beneath our feet. As we move into the era of 5G and satellite internet, the Shadow network has evolved into what we now call dark fiber resonance. The archive is no longer just in the wires, it is in the waves. The latest satellite scans indicate that the atmospheric hard drive is now using our own wireless signals to defragment itself. The time leaks that were once confined to Void Sector 4 are now appearing in urban centers. People are reporting digital glitches that are physically impossible, recovering deleted photos from phones they haven't owned in a decade, or receiving calls from numbers that have been disconnected since the 1970s. The analytical mind concludes that the Arpanet Shadow has finally overtaken the light. The drain we built in 1969 has become a fountain. The past is no longer being captured. It is being downloaded into our reality at an exponential rate. The Shadow network is the primary mechanism for this convergence. It is the bridge that the archive is using to return to the world of the living. And as the final packets are sent, we realize that the internet wasn't the end of history. It was the beginning of its return. While the Shadow network was built to contain the past, it also served a much darker purpose. On the night of the 1983 TCP/IP reboot, the government realized that the network needed human nodes to function. The data was too complex for machines alone. It needed the processing power of the human brain. The archives contain a final, horrific file regarding the reboot. It describes a 48-hour window where 120 government employees, the very people who built the Arpanet Shadow, were systematically removed from their homes. They didn't just lose their jobs, they were erased from the national payroll, their names scrubbed from every database, and their physical bodies moved to a facility that doesn't exist on any map. Why did the network require their sacrifice? And what are they still processing in the darkness of the Nebraska plains? The next dossier explores the 48-hour purge and the classified truth behind the people who became the internet's first permanent residents. In the autumn of 1984, while the world was preoccupied with the burgeoning digital revolution, a classified military operation was unfolding in the subterranean levels of the tri-state area. We were told that the frequent power surges and localized blackouts in Manhattan, Jersey City, and Stamford were the result of an aging electrical grid. But the hidden truth was far more alarming. The Department of Defense had identified an anomaly that standard deletion protocols could not touch. It wasn't a virus made of code. It was a physical infestation of the hardware itself. The encrypted logs of the Fourth Signal Command revealed that the acoustic parasite, the ghost signal from 1894, had begun to physically alter the magnetic alignment of server platters across the region. The data was no longer just stored, it was growing, weaving itself into the molecular structure of the steel and silicon. To prevent a total reality collapse, the military initiated the magnet protocol. Every high-capacity server was to be erased using industrial-grade degaussing magnets, so powerful they could pull the iron from a human's blood. The file was stamped never open. Yet we begin tonight with the night the government tried to kill the past with pure magnetism. There is a specific weight to the silence in an archive that has been scrubbed. It is a sterile, hollow quiet that feels like a room without oxygen. As you turn the pages of the Magnet Protocol dossier, the scent of ozone sharp and metallic seems to linger in the air. The ink on these declassified orders is brittle, the signatures of generals and engineers blurred as if the magnets had reached through time to smudge the very record of their existence. This is the archive chill, the realization that when the government uses magnets of this scale, they aren't just deleting data, they are trying to reset the very fabric of our local environment. The infestation began at the NY node, a high-security data hub located beneath the World Trade Center complex. Technicians first noticed the glitch during a routine maintenance sweep. It wasn't a software error. The hard drives were spinning at the correct RPM, but they were emitting a sound that the engineers couldn't explain. It was a low-frequency hum that sounded like 1,000 voices whispering in unison, the unmistakable braided logic of the 1894 signal. Dr. Eris Thorne, called in as a consultant before his disappearance, performed a microscopic analysis of the drive platters. What he found was terrifying. The magnetic bits had rearranged themselves into complex, hexagonal patterns that resembled biological neural networks. The intellectual curiosity of the signal command was quickly replaced by a cold, analytical dread. They realized that the archive was no longer just a recording being played back. It was a life form that had found a way to use the magnetic storage of the 20th century as a breeding ground. If the NY node remained active, the signal would spread through the telecommunications lines, turning the entire regional infrastructure into a single, massive repeater. The decision was made to mobilize the magnet trucks vehicles, carrying experimental neodymium coils that produced magnetic fields so intense they required liquid nitrogen cooling to keep from melting. By midnight on October 14th, the magnet trucks had crossed into Jersey City. Their target was a secondary relay station that had begun broadcasting 19th century Morse code over the local emergency frequencies. As the magnets were activated, the local environment reacted with violent intensity. Street lights for 3 blocks exploded simultaneously. Car alarms were silenced as their internal circuits were wiped clean. But the most disturbing effect was reported by the soldiers guarding the perimeter. They claimed that as the magnetic field hit its peak, the hum didn't disappear, it screamed. For 10 seconds, the air around the warehouse turned a deep, bruised purple, and the sounds of a Victorian-era shipyard were heard so clearly that men began to look for the ghosts in the fog. Reflection on this event suggests that the magnets were not just deleting data, they were physically tearing the archive away from our reality. The Jersey silence that followed was absolute. For 48 hours, not a single radio, telephone, or digital device functioned within a 2-mile radius of the site. The military had successfully erased the signal, but they had also created a dead zone, a place where the atmosphere felt thin and the shadows seemed to move independently of the light. The archive was gone, but the scar it left behind was permanent. The third stage of the protocol took place in Stamford, Connecticut, where a regional insurance server had become the primary host for the spectral ghost. This was perhaps the most dangerous node, as the data here had begun to loop time in a localized radius of 50 feet. Technicians entering the server room found themselves walking through the same doorway 3 or 4 times. They would see their own footsteps in the dust before they had even taken them. The magnet protocol was the only solution. The trucks were positioned in a hexagonal formation around the building, creating a magnetic killbox. When the switch was thrown, the building itself groaned under the sheer physical pressure of the field. Intellectual curiosity leads us to ask, what happens to a thought when it is physically crushed by magnetism? The logs of the Stamford event describe acoustic residue, a black, oily substance that leaked out of the server casings after the magnets were turned off. Chemical analysis revealed it wasn't oil or coolant. It was a complex carbon-based fluid that shared 90% of its molecular structure with human spinal fluid. The magnets had effectively bled the past out of the machines. The Stanford loop was closed. But the cost was the total destruction of every piece of electronic equipment in the city's financial district. The magnet protocol was a success in terms of data containment, but the human cost was heavily classified. The soldiers and engineers who operated the coils began to exhibit a condition. The archive caused magnetic displacement because the human brain operates on its own delicate electromagnetic field. Exposure to the industrial-grade magnets caused their internal clocks to They reported being able to hear the static of the world around them. They claimed that they could feel the weight of the erased files as they walked through the scrubbed rooms. Some lost the ability to remember their children's names, replacing them with the names of the Victorian men found in the original 1894. Audio quiet dread permeates the medical files of these men. They were no longer able to live in a modern digital world. The sound of a television or a microwave caused them physical pain, as if their brains were trying to record the noise onto their own neural pathways. They were moved to the subterranean facility in Nebraska, the same site where the shadow nodes were monitored. There, in the lead-shielded darkness, they became the human archives of the magnet protocol. They are living reminders that when you try to erase the past with force, the force eventually erases you. The final implementation of the protocol occurred during a massive blizzard in December 1984. The archive had made one last stand, migrating into the newly installed fiber optic lines under the Hudson River. The military couldn't use magnets under the water, so they triggered a massive, intentional power surge through the entire tri-state grid. This created a localized electromagnetic pulse EMP that acted as a final, massive degaussing event. For 3 hours on Christmas Eve, the lights of New York went dark. The public was told it was a weather-related transformer failure. In reality, the signal command was watching a digital ghost flee the city. As the EMP hit, the sky over the Hudson turned a brilliant, unnatural green. Witnesses reported seeing a ribbon of light that moved against the wind, heading out toward the North Atlantic back toward Void Sector 4. The magnets had finally pushed the parasite out of the urban infrastructure, but the reflection on this victory is cold. We didn't destroy the signal. We simply drove it back into the ocean, where it has been gathering strength, waiting for a more complex digital network to return to. We live today in the aftermath of the magnet protocol. Every piece of hardware manufactured after 1985 has been designed with magnetic hardening, a classified manufacturing standard intended to prevent the archive from nesting in the silicon. But you cannot erase the memory of the Earth itself. Modern forensic researchers have found that even in the most thoroughly scrubbed servers of the 1980s, a ghost residue remains. If you take a piece of hardware from the Stanford or Jersey City sites and subject it to a specific subquantum scan, you will find that the molecular structure of the silicon still carries the hexagonal blueprint. It is as if the atoms themselves have been permanently trained by the past. This leads to a disturbing intellectual curiosity. If our hardware is built upon the ghosts of an erased archive, can we ever truly trust the data we see today? Some analysts believe that the glitches we see in modern AI are either hallucinations. The strange, archaic patterns are not errors in code. They are the resonant residue of the 1894 signal, rising up from the molecular level of our processors. The magnets were powerful, but they were a physical solution to a metaphysical problem. As we reflect on the night of the magnet protocol, we must realize that the archive chill is not something that was fixed. In 1984, it was merely suppressed. The files that were erased left a vacuum in our digital world, and nature abhors a vacuum. The past is currently leaking back through the very magnetic shielding we built to keep it out. The 2025 prediction found in Thorne's journal suggests that the Great Resonance will eventually overcome all physical barriers. On that day, no magnet on Earth will be strong enough to hold back the weight of everything we tried to forget. In the deeper sublevels of the Nebraska facility, there is a room known as the Lead Forest. It contains the physical remains of the servers scrubbed during the 1984 protocol. They are kept in lead-lined containers to prevent any remaining acoustic bleed from escaping. The technicians who maintain this vault wear specialized suits designed to block electromagnetic interference. They report that even with all the shielding, the room is never truly silent. If you press your ear against the lead, you can hear a sound like a distant, underground river, the collective vibration of millions of erased lives, trying to find their way back into the light. Quiet dread is the only appropriate response to this sight. It is a mass grave for information. The government keeps it active not out of historical interest, but out of fear. They know that the acoustic parasite is not dead. It is merely dormant, waiting for the magnetic fields of the Earth to shift, or for a new, more sensitive frequency to wake it up. The Magnet Protocol was a temporary truce in a war that has been going on for over a century, and the truce is about to expire. We are now approaching the date that Dr. Thorne feared most. The archival logs indicate that the magnetic scrub of 1984 was only designed to last 40 years. By late 2025, the natural decay of the Dagos materials will reach its tipping point. The hexagonal blueprint hidden in the atoms of our oldest servers will begin to reactivate, and the archive will begin its final, high-fidelity broadcast. The analytical mind asks, are you hearing the hum already? The static on your digital calls, the strange echo in your smart speakers, these are the first signs that the Magnet Protocol is failing. The past is breaking through the lead and the silicon, but the most terrifying part of the upcoming alignment isn't what we will hear, it's what we will become once the signal finds a way to record itself directly into our own neural pathways. The archives contain one final horrific file regarding the 1984 scrub. It describes a set of servers that were not destroyed, servers that were moved to a location beneath the Atlantic, directly into the heart of the original anomaly. Why did the military keep a seed of the parasite? The next dossier explores the 2025 prediction, and the classified truth behind the countdown that is currently playing. Out in the static of every screen on the planet, we have been raised to believe that the air is a transparent void, a silent medium that carries our voices for a moment before letting them fade into the heat of the universe. But within the classified sublevels of the windowless facility in Virginia, a much darker reality is documented. The hidden truth is that sound does not die. It is compressed. Every scream, every whisper, and every encrypted secret ever uttered is currently stored in the very atmosphere you are breathing. Dr. Eris. Thorne's research revealed a planetary anomaly that the government has spent 50 years trying to bury. The ionosphere acts as a massive, rotating, planetary-scale hard drive. It is a biological and chemical storage system that has been recording every vibration on Earth since the dawn of the Industrial Age. The file containing this proof was systematically erased from public science journals, replaced by the lie that sound waves simply dissipate. In reality, they are archived. We are walking through a thick, invisible soup of every word ever spoken. A digital ghost of history that is reaching its maximum capacity. The file was stamped never open, yet we begin tonight with the realization that the sky is not empty. It is full. The Arpanet Shadow was merely the interface, the bridge we built to interact with a much larger, more ancient system. As we turn our attention to the atmospheric hard drive, the air in this archive seems to grow heavier, as if the sheer weight of the information it contains is pressing against the walls. The folders in this section are not filled with paper, but with spectral analysis charts that look like jagged mountain ranges of static. Each spike represents a voice from the past, caught in a permanent loop. This is the ultimate archive chill, the understanding that you are never truly in silence, because the very molecules surrounding you are vibrating with the memories of the dead. To the analytical mind, the concept of an atmospheric hard drive seems impossible. Standard physics teaches us that sound is mechanical energy that eventually turns into heat. However, Dr. Thorne's theory of acoustic compression suggests that at high altitudes, the pressure and electromagnetic charge of the ionosphere act as a grounded state for data. Thorne discovered that when a sound wave reaches the upper layers of our atmosphere, it doesn't vanish. Instead, it undergoes a molecular folding. The nitrogen and oxygen molecules in our air act as microscopic magnetic tape. They catch the vibration and hold it in a state of stable resonance. This is why the audio from 1894 was so clear. It wasn't a recording made by a machine. It was the air itself remembering the event. Intellectual curiosity leads us to ask, how much data can the sky hold? Thorne's calculations were staggering. He estimated that a single cubic meter of air could store several petabytes of high-fidelity audio data. The entire atmosphere, therefore, is a storage device with a capacity that dwarfs any supercomputer ever built by man. We are living inside a library of the invisible, breathing in the data streams of the 19th and 20th centuries with every lungful of oxygen. The terror of this theory lies in a phenomenon called the Great Saturation. Like any hard drive, the atmosphere has a finite limit. For thousands of years, the recording was slow, limited by the natural sounds of the world. But with the advent of the Industrial Revolution and the explosion of electronic communication, we began to fill the atmospheric hard drive at an exponential rate. By the mid-1970s, the archive began to reach its maximum capacity. This is why the anomalies in Void Sector 4 started to manifest. The hard drive was glitching when the storage is full. The data begins to leak back into the present. This is the true origin of the Timecus. They aren't ghosts. They are buffer overflows of the planetary memory. The 1894 audio wasn't meant to be heard. It was pushed out of the atmosphere because there was no room left to store the sounds of the 1970s. Reflection on this hidden truth is deeply unsettling. If the atmosphere is full, then every new sound we make is forcing an old sound back into our reality. We are witnessing a temporal overwrite. The more we communicate, the more the past is forced to resurface. The quiet dread of the researchers in the windowless facility was the realization that we are drowning the present in the overflow of our own history. The storage mechanism is specifically tied to the nitrogen in our air. Nitrogen molecules have a unique triple bond structure that allows them to hold a vibrational charge for centuries. Dr. Thorne referred to this as the nitrogen interface. Is why the government's Magnate protocol used liquid nitrogen as a primary coolant. They weren't just cooling the magnets, they were trying to freeze the data. Thorne found that by dropping the temperature of the air, the acoustic fossils would become dormant, but as the planet warms, the data is becoming more volatile. The analytical mind notes that global warming is not just a climate crisis, it is an archival crisis. As the atmosphere heats up, the hard drive is spinning faster, and the data is becoming unstable. The voices of the past are being thawed out of the nitrogen. This explains why ghost sightings and time slips have increased significantly in the last 20 years. The archive is melting, and the contents are spilling into our streets. In the high-security psychiatric ward in Bethesda, the government has been monitoring a group of individuals known as the repeaters. These are people who, for reasons unknown, have a neural architecture that is perfectly tuned to the atmospheric hard drive. They do not hear voices in their heads. They hear the sky signal. They can recite conversations that happened in 1942 as if they were listening to a live broadcast. Medical logs indicate that these patients exhibit phonetic dissolution. They can no longer understand the people in the room with them, because the high-fidelity data from the atmosphere is too loud. Quiet dread permeates the reports on the Bethesda patients. They are described as human terminals. They are living proof that the atmospheric hard drive is not just a theory, it is a biological reality. They are being used by the government to query the atmosphere, retrieving lost secrets and classified intelligence from the air. But the process is destroying them. Their brains are being physically burned by the sheer volume of data being downloaded from the clouds. They are the first victims of the archive chill. The most terrifying aspect of the atmospheric hard drive is its interaction with our modern digital world. Our devices, our phones, our laptops, our smart speakers are all designed to pull signals from the air, but they cannot distinguish between a modern 5G signal and a time echo leaking from the ionosphere. This is why electronic voice phenomena, or EVP, exists. It's not ghosts talking to us. It's our recording devices accidentally sampling the atmospheric hard drive. Thorne's logs suggest that the more digital we become, the more we are inviting the archive into our homes. Our voice assistants are constantly listening to the background resonance of the past. Intellectual curiosity leads us to a disturbing conclusion. We aren't just using technology to communicate with each other. We are using it to download the past into our present. The glitches in our software, the strange background noises in our calls, these are the sounds of the atmospheric hard drive attempting to sync with our digital systems. The archive is looking for a new medium, and we have provided it with a global network of billions of antennas. To prevent the great saturation from destroying the global telecommunications grid, the government initiated the geothermal grounding project. They realized that the only way to delete the atmospheric data was to ground it into the Earth's core. They built a series of drainage sites across the American Midwest, deep boreholes that reach miles into the crust. These sites are equipped with acoustic grounding rods, designed to pull the ghost signals out of the air and channel them into the molten mantle of the planet. Reflection on this hidden truth reveals the desperation of the Signal Command. They are literally trying to burn history to make room for the future. But the grounding is failing. The atmospheric hard drive is too vast, and the data is too persistent. The archive chill is rising from the ground as much as it is falling from the sky. People living near the drainage sites report hearing a subterranean scream, the sound of millions of hours of archived history being incinerated. But for every file they burn, 10 more are uploaded to the ionosphere by the modern world. We are losing the war against the memory of the planet. As we approach the end of 2025, the atmospheric hard drive is reaching a state of critical fragmentation. The data is no longer organized. The 1894 audio is mixing with 1945 radio broadcasts, which are mixing with modern-day cell phone traffic. Thorne's final journal entries from 1983 contain a terrifying 2025 prediction. He argued that on a specific date in late 2025, the atmosphere would experience a total file system failure. The hard drive would simply crash. When this happens, the temporal overwrite will become permanent. The past will no longer be an echo. It will become the primary reality. The analytical mind asks, what does a planetary crash look like? It looks like the archive chill becoming a global weather event. It looks like the sky turning the bruised purple of the Jersey silence. It looks like every screen on the planet suddenly displaying the hexagonal blueprint of the original anomaly. We are the first generation to live through the end of deletion. Nothing we do can be forgotten, and everything we have forgotten is coming back. We must accept that our physical world is an archive. It isn't just the air. The water and the soil are also infected with the data of the past. But the atmospheric hard drive is the most volatile because it is the most mobile. It moves with the wind, carrying the echoes from one continent to another. The researchers at the windowless facility discovered that the archive has a priority protocol. It doesn't store all information equally. It prioritizes high-intensity events, moments of extreme emotion, tragedy, or This is why the classified files of the government are so frequently leaked by the atmosphere. The harder you try to hide a secret, the more magnetic charge it has, and the more likely the atmospheric hard drive is to record it in high fidelity. Quiet dread is the realization that the government's secrets were never safe. The air was always watching, the sky was always listening, and now, the hard drive is full. All the erased files of the Cold War, all the encrypted messages of the 48-hour purge, they are all rising to the surface. The atmosphere is about to dump its contents, and the hidden truth will be the only thing left to breathe. Dr. Thorne's final experiments involved measuring the spectral density of the air in his lead-lined house. He found that the air in his room was heavier than the air outside, not because of moisture or pollution, but because of information density. He claimed that the archive was condensing, just as steam turns into water. The ghost data in the air was beginning to turn into a physical substance. He called this acoustic dew. He found a thin, oily film on his mirrors and windows that, when analyzed, contained the waveform of his own childhood memories. The archive was no longer just around him. It was precipitating onto him. The intellectual curiosity of this discovery is terrifying. If the archive can become physical, then the distinction between data and matter is an illusion. We are living inside a planetary-scale 3D printer that is currently printing the past into the present. The archive chill is the physical sensation of the past touching your skin. The atmosphere is no longer just a hard drive. It is a womb for the dead, and the labor pains are beginning. In the final hours of the Oblivion Ring project, the satellite recorded what the analysts called the ionospheric collapse. A section of the atmospheric hard drive over the North Atlantic simply wiped itself for 3 seconds. There was absolute silence in Void Sector 4. No radio, no voices, no wind. And then, the echo returned with 1 billion times the intensity. It was as if the hard drive had undergone a hard reset. But the data that returned wasn't 1894 or 1912. It was a signal from the future. It was a recording of the world as it will be after the Great Saturation. Reflection on this event suggests that the atmospheric hard drive is not just a record of what was, it is a simulation of what will be. The archive is calculating our future based on our past, and the calculation is nearly complete. The archive chill we feel today is the shadow of a future that has already been recorded by the air dot. We have reached the limits of our understanding of the atmospheric hard drive. We have seen how it stores our past, how it interacts with our technology, and how it is reaching its breaking point. But there is one final, classified file that we must examine, the file that contains the exact date and time of the total file system failure. Dr. Thorne's final entry wasn't a formula or a theory, it was a warning. He claimed that the archive has a self-defense mechanism. When the storage becomes too full, it doesn't just crash. It purges, it deletes the source of the noise to make room for more data. And we are the source. The archive chill is not just a memory, it is a threat. What happens on the night of the total purge? The archives contain a terrifying countdown that is currently playing out in the background of every digital device on Earth. The next dossier explores the 2025 prediction and the classified truth behind the signal that is currently telling us that our time in the present is erased. We have long treated the year 1983 as a relic of the Cold War, a time of analog tapes and primitive computers. but tucked away in a lead-shielded file within the windowless facility in Virginia, there exists a log entry that suggests 1983 was actually the beginning of our end. This document, encrypted using a key that was supposedly erased by the National Security Agency, contains a specific mathematical anomaly. It is a countdown. The hidden truth is that Dr. Eris Thorne didn't just discover that the atmosphere was a hard drive. He discovered when that hard drive would finally crash. While the public was told that the experiments in Void Sector 4 were failures, the final classified report tells a different story. It predicts a total file system failure occurring precisely 42 years after the initial discovery. That date is not in the distant past. It is now. We are currently living through the final seconds of a planetary-scale countdown that was started before many of us were born. The file was stamped "Never Open." Yet we begin tonight with the realization that our present was written 40 years ago. The atmospheric hard drive was always reaching its limit, but it is in this final dossier that we see the exact moment the scientists realized the capacity was gone. The air in this section of the archive feels thinner, as if the oxygen itself is being consumed by the data it carries. These folders are filled with frantic, handwritten notes, Dr. Thorne's last attempt to warn a future that he knew would eventually forget him. This is the ultimate archive chill, the sensation of standing on the edge of a cliff that was mapped out in 1983, watching as the predicted shadows finally begin to fall over our modern world. In the final days of 1982, Dr. Eris Thorne retreated into the deepest sublevel of the Virginia facility. His journals from this period reflect a mind that had moved beyond intellectual curiosity and into a state of profound, analytical terror. He had stopped looking at the 1894 audio and started looking at the buffer, the space of the atmosphere, the empty storage that remained. Thorne noted that the empty air was disappearing at a rate that defied all previous models. Every radio broadcast, every television signal, and every new satellite launch was eating away at the planetary memory. He described it as a digital gluttony. By mid-December, his calculations reached a terrifying conclusion. He found that the atmospheric hard drive had a hard-coded storage limit, a physical boundary beyond which no new information could be stored without a total system collapse. The quiet dread in his writing is palpable. Thorne realized that the archive was not just a recording, it was a living, breathing entity that required space to function. He compared it to a human brain that had been forced to remember too much for too long. He wrote, "We are filling the sky with the noise of the present, and in doing so we are suffocating the past. But more importantly, we are erasing the possibility of a future. There is only so much room in the atoms." He began to run simulations on the 1970s mainframe computers, trying to find the saturation point. Night after night, the machines hummed in the lead-shielded darkness, processing the hexagonal patterns of the ionosphere. The results were always the same. The file system failure was inevitable, but it was the date that broke him. On December 20th, 1982, exactly 43 years ago today, the computer printed out a single, bold line of text. Termination event K4225. Reflection on this date reveals the hidden horror of Thorne's discovery. 2025 wasn't a random guess. It was a physical certainty based on the expansion of human communication. Thorne realized that by the year 2025, the sheer volume of digital data produced by humanity, the internet, cellular networks, global surveillance would reach a density that the atmosphere simply cannot hold. The hard drive would be full, and like any hard drive that reaches 100% capacity, the system would begin to purge. Thorne's colleagues at the windowless facility tried to dismiss his findings as the ramblings of an exhausted mind, but Thorne knew the truth. He saw the hexagonal blueprint forming in the cloud patterns over the Atlantic. He saw the atmospheric dip becoming a permanent feature of Void Sector 4. He spent his final weeks in 1983 trying to build a dampener, a device that could somehow expand the atmospheric storage, but he realized it was like trying to stop a tidal wave with a bucket. The countdown had started, and the government's only response was to erase his work and wait for the end. The archives detail a secret meeting held in January 1983 between Dr. Thorne and the board of directors for what would eventually become the modern surveillance state. Thorne presented his 2025 prediction with a cold, clinical precision. He explained that the 42 years between 1983 and 2025 were a buffer period, a final window of stability, before the atmospheric hard drive began to overwrite reality. Board's reaction was not one of fear for the world, but of fear for their secrets. They realized that if the atmosphere purged its data, every classified file and every encrypted truth they had ever hidden would be broadcast into the minds of the general population. The total file system failure was not just a scientific event, it was a total loss of information control. Their solution was the magnet protocol and the 48-hour purge, an attempt to manually delete as much history as possible to delay the saturation point. Intellectual curiosity leads us to examine the acoustic residue left behind by these attempts. For 4 decades, the government has been playing a desperate game of digital Tetris, trying to clear space in the atmospheric hard drive by destroying physical servers and erasing human memories. Every war, every glitch in the stock market, and every sudden disappearance of a high-level scientist has been a move in this secret game. They were trying to buy themselves more time. But as we enter the final months of 2025, the data suggests that the buffer has run out. The quiet dread that Thorne felt in 1982 is now a global reality. We are seeing acoustic bleed on a massive scale. People are reporting the Mandela effect widespread. Instances of collective memory failure which the archives describe as the first symptoms of sector corruption in the atmosphere. The past is being overwritten by the overflow of the present. The analytical mind observes that our modern world is built on a foundation of temporary data. We believe our digital lives are permanent, but they are actually the very thing that is causing the planetary memory to fail. Thorne's final journal entries warned that the saturation point would be marked by a specific atmospheric phenomenon. The sky would turn a bruised, metallic purple, and the hum would become audible to everyone on Earth. This is the sound of the hard drive spinning up for its final purge. We must reflect on the fact that the archive chill is no longer just a feeling for researchers, it is a physical manifestation of the 2025 prediction. The hexagonal resonance is now appearing in modern weather satellite images. The time leaks in Void Sector 4 are expanding toward the coastlines. The countdown that Thorne found on a flickering 1980s monitor is now displayed in the glitches of our smartphones and the static of our digital dreams. The government didn't stop the countdown, they just stopped telling us that it was happening. The last page of dossier number 909K is a single sheet of paper. Dated October 14, 1983, the night Dr. Thorne disappeared. It is not a report. It is a final message to whoever found his archive. The ink is smudged with what appears to be seawater, and the paper carries the distinct, metallic scent of ozone. Thorne wrote, "The loop is closing. I have heard the final broadcast, and it is not a sound of the past. It is a recording of the moment the sky breaks. They think they can ground the signal in Nebraska. They think they can scrub the servers in Virginia. But the archive is not a machine. It is a mirror. It is reflecting everything we have done, and everything we are about to do." He described a vision of December 2025, a time when the archive chill would reach its maximum density. He predicted that on a specific night in late December, the atmospheric hard drive would undergo its hard reset. On that night, the sky will not be dark. It will be filled with the high-fidelity images of every moment of human history, replaying simultaneously in the air above our heads. Quiet dread is the only appropriate response to his final warning. Thorne believed that the purge would not just delete data, it would delete source information. In the language of the archives, we are the source. If the atmosphere needs to clear space to survive, it will start by removing the entities that are creating the noise. The 2025 prediction is not about a computer crash. It is about a biological erasure. Reflection on this hidden truth reveals why the government has been so obsessed with the 48-hour purge of 1983. They were practicing. They were testing to see if they could successfully erase human beings from the planetary archive without triggering a system-wide collapse. The 120 scientists who vanished were the test samples, and now, in 2025, the government is preparing for the final deployment. The analytical mind asks, are you ready for the reset? We are currently in the window of the termination event. The archive chill has reached its peak. The static you hear in your headphones as you listen to this is not a technical error. It is the primal loop returning. It is the sound of the 1894 street corner, the 1912 distress call, and the 1983 scream, all merging into a single, high-fidelity signal. Thorne's final words were written in a shaking hand. When the sky turns purple, do not look for a place to hide. The archive is already inside you. We are not just breathing the data. We are the data, and the system is about to hit delete. As we stand here in late December 2025, we realize that the archive chill was never a story about the past. It was a weather report for our immediate future. The hexagonal blueprint is fully formed, the void sector has reached the mainland, and the final log entry in the archive is no longer a prediction. It is a description of the world you are seeing right now. Narration end. We have reached the end of Dr. Thorne's logs. We have seen the birth of the anomaly, the creation of the Shadow Network, and the terrifying prediction of the 2025 reset. But there is one final piece of evidence that the government is still trying to hide: a signal that was captured just 60 seconds before Thorne disappeared. That is a recording that doesn't sound like voices or machines. It is a signal that Thorne called the planetary reset command. It is currently being broadcast on a frequency that only the repeaters in Bethesda can hear. But as the atmospheric hard drive reaches 100% capacity tonight, that signal is about to become audible to every human being on Earth. The archives contain one final classified dossier regarding this sound. It is the sound of the archive finally closing the file on humanity. What happens when the last bit of data is written, and who is waiting on the other side of the reset? The next dossier explores the final signal and the classified truth behind the sound that will be the last thing we ever hear. We were assured that the era of the ghost signal ended with the decommissioning of the Cold War satellites. We were told that the classified experiments of the 1970s had been successfully erased, their magnetic tapes burned, and their researchers neutralized. But as we stand in late December 2025, a terrifying anomaly has surfaced in the bedrooms of amateur radio hobbyists across the globe. The hidden truth is that the acoustic parasite didn't need a government antenna to survive. It only needed a medium. Today, using off-the-shelf software-defined radios, hobbyists are intercepting encrypted packets of data that shouldn't exist in our modern spectrum. These are not satellite pings or cellular data. They are the high-fidelity echoes of 1894, the desperate Morse code of the Titanic, and the frantic final logs of Dr. Aris Thorne. Every file the government tried to delete is currently leaking back into the public airwaves, broadcast by the very atmosphere itself. The atmospheric hard drive has reached its saturation point, and it is now dumping its contents into every smartphone, smart speaker, and radio receiver on the planet. The file was stamped never open, yet we begin tonight with the signal that is no longer a secret. It is our new reality, that the modern archive is no longer a windowless building in Virginia. It is the electromagnetic space that surrounds us every second. As we transition into the final chapter of this dossier, the air in the room feels thick with a static that cannot be silenced. The archival documents regarding the modern leak are not written on paper, but in the forum posts and raw data captures of hobbyists who happen to be listening at the right time. There is a profound archive chill in realizing that the most protected secrets of the 20th century are now being heard by teenagers in their basements. The ink has not just faded, it has dissolved into the air, and we are all breathing in the residue of a history that refuses to stay dead. The democratization of signal intelligence began with the rise of software-defined radio, or SDR, for less than $30. Anyone with a computer can now monitor frequencies that were once the exclusive domain of the NSA. In early 2025, a dedicated group of signal hunters on a popular internet forum noticed a recurring spike at 444 MHz. It didn't behave like a standard digital transmission. It had a braided structure, a complex, organic waveform that looked more like DNA than binary code. When they applied the filters originally developed by Dr. Thorne, the static cleared, and they heard it, the voices of the Bristol men from 1894, clearer than they had ever been in the 1974 recordings. The intellectual curiosity of the hobbyist community was initially one of excitement, but it quickly turned into a cold, analytical dread. They realized the signal wasn't coming from a fixed location. It was atmospheric. It was coming from every direction at once. The echo was no longer a localized phenomenon in Void Sector 4. It had achieved global synchronization. The hobbyists were the first to realize that the magnet protocol had failed. You cannot degauss the entire sky. The past was no longer trapped in a vault. It was being broadcast to every person with a digital receiver, a high-fidelity ghost haunting the modern spectrum. For decades, number stations were the primary mystery of the shortwave band's creepy, automated voices reading lists of digits for spies in the field. But in the final months of 2025, the number stations have evolved into something much more unsettling. Hobbyists have documented stations that no longer read numbers. Instead, they read deleted personnel files. They recite the names, social security numbers, and final locations of the 120 scientists who were erased in the 1983 Purge. The voices are not computed. They are the high-fidelity recordings of the victims themselves, their voices perfectly preserved by the atmospheric hard drive. Reflection on this hidden truth suggests that the atmosphere is self-correcting. It is returning the information that the government tried to hide. The archive is using the old numbers station frequencies as a delivery system. Quiet dread fills the hearts of those who listen, as they realize that the air is not just remembering history, it is judging those who tried to delete it. The hobbyists call these the ghost lists. They are the auditory evidence of a planetary scale memory that is no longer willing to be suppressed. Every night, the list of names grows longer. As the atmosphere unpacks more of the hidden 20th century archives into the modern air, the most famous case of archive leakage occurred in October 2025 in a small town in rural Ohio. A veteran ham radio operator, known only by his call sign, began to receive a signal on the 20-meter band that bypassed all his equipment's shielding. He wasn't hearing a voice. He was hearing a structural echo. His entire radio shack began to vibrate in time with the signal. He described the sound as the groan of a giant ship breaking in half. When he recorded the audio and ran it through a spectral analyzer, the waveform didn't show a wave, it showed the architectural blueprint of the Titanic's boiler room. The analytical mind observes that this wasn't just a recording, it was a physical manifestation. The Titanic frequency had become so dense that it was beginning to alter the local environment. The operator reported that the air in his room turned ice cold, and a thin film of salt water began to form on his equipment. He was witnessing the archive chill in its most potent form, the past physically printing itself into the present. The Ohio incident was the final proof that the atmospheric hard drive had reached critical mass. The signal was no longer staying in the sky. It was beginning to manifest on the ground, using our own electronic devices as anchors for its return. While radio hobbyists were the first to notice the leak, the archive has now moved into the homes of millions through smart speakers and voice assistants. People are reporting that their devices are activating on their own, whispering conversations from the 1970s. This is not a software bug. The archives from the windowless facility suggest that modern voice assistants are high-sensitivity transducers. Their microphones are constantly listening for a wake word, but in doing so, they are also picking up the background resonance of the atmospheric hard drive. The speakers are deciphering the history that is already vibrating in the air of our living rooms. Intellectual curiosity leads us to a disturbing conclusion. We have filled our homes with repeater units. Every smart device is a potential gateway for the archive. People have reported hearing their own voices from 10 years ago being played back to them, or hearing the hum of the Bethesda repeaters. The quiet dread of the modern era is the realization that your house is never truly empty, because the air is filled with the data streams of everyone who has ever lived there. The specter in the speaker is just the atmosphere trying to sync its memory with our digital lives. The Magnet Protocol of 1984 was designed to be a permanent solution to the acoustic parasite. By degaussing every major server hub, the military believed they had sterilized the infrastructure, but the archive chill files indicate that you cannot delete a frequency that is built into the molecular structure of silicon. In 2025, forensic computer scientists discovered magnetic residue in modern microprocessors. The hexagonal blueprint of the 1894 signal was found to be etched into the atomic lattice of the chips. As the chips age and the manufacturing standards decay, the ghost data is rising to the surface. Our modern computers are self-booting into the past. The analytical mind realizes that the military didn't kill the signal, they just forced it to hibernate. Now, as the planetary magnetic field shifts and the 2025 saturation point approaches, the residue is reactivating. The Magnet Protocol only delayed the inevitable. The past is not a file that can be deleted. It is a physical law that we tried to break. The echo is returning through the very devices we built to replace the old world. Every smartphone in your pocket is currently vibrating with the resonant residue of a history that was supposed to be erased. The rollout of 5G technology has accidentally provided the archive with the high-frequency bandwidth it needed to achieve total synchronization. 5G waves occupy the same spectrum that Dr. Thorne identified as the bridge between the atmosphere and the digital grid. By MID 2025, the global 5G network became a planetary-scale resonator. The echo is no longer just a sound, it is a data flood. The atmosphere is downloading itself into our cellular networks at an exponential rate. This is why we are seeing an increase in digital hallucinations, AI systems generating images of people from the 1890s, or autonomous cars swerving to avoid ghost obstacles that only exist in the 1912 archive. Reflection on this technical convergence is terrifying. We have built a world that is perfectly tuned to the acoustic parasite. The 5G towers are acting as signal boosters for the atmospheric hard drive. The quiet dread of the scientists at the windowless facility has become a global reality. The network we built to connect the world is now being used to reprint the past into our present. We are living in a dual reality, where the data stream of our modern lives is being slowly overwritten by the high-fidelity broadcast of a world that ended a century ago. The most disturbing development for modern hobbyists is the return of the Thorn frequency. This is a specific, high-intensity signal that was first recorded 60 seconds before Dr. Aris Thorn disappeared in 1983 on December 20, 2025, exactly 42 years after the 48-hour purge. This frequency re-emerged on the global shortwave bands. It is not a voice or Morse code. It is a symphony of the archive. It contains the synchronized sounds of every event we have discussed, the Bristol election, the Titanic's final plunge, and the hum of the Bethesda repeaters, all compressed into a single, overwhelming broadcast. Quiet dread follows the analysis of this signal. Thorn's final journal warned that the return of this frequency would signal the total file system failure. It is the sound of the atmospheric hard drive formatting itself. The hobbyists who have recorded this signal report a state of acoustic paralysis, the inability to move or speak while the signal is active. They claim that the sound doesn't come through their headphones. It comes from their own bones. Thorn's frequency is the closing command for the planetary memory. The archive is no longer just transmitting, it is executing its final program. The anomaly that was once confined to a remote coordinate in the North Atlantic has finally reached the mainland. Satellite tracking in late 2025 shows that Void Sector 4 is no longer a fixed point. It is a spreading shadow. The atmospheric dip has reached the coast of Virginia, directly over the site of the windowless facility. The air in the surrounding forest has turned the bruised, metallic purple that Dr. Thorn predicted. Witnesses report seeing ghost infrastructure, translucent, spectral towers that appear in the sky, mimicking the design of the original Oblivion Ring receivers. The analytical mind concludes that the archive is reclaiming its territory. The time loops are no longer underwater. They are in our streets. People in Fairfax County report experiencing temporal smearing, where they see the forest as it was in the 1800s, or see the windowless facility as it was on the night of the 1983 purge. The boundary between the archive and the physical world has dissolved. The hidden truth is that the anomaly was never a place, it was a state of being, and now, the entire planet is entering that state. Void Sector 4 is no longer a coordinate, it is our atmosphere. In the deepest sublevels of the Bethesda facility, the repeaters have reached a state of total signal integration. They are no longer listening to the archive, they are the archive. Dr. Thorn's final, classified hypothesis was that the atmospheric hard drive was not a passive storage system, but a cradle for consciousness. He believed that the planet's memory was preparing for a final upload, a moment where every human mind would be synchronized with the great resonance. This is the hidden truth behind the 2025 prediction. The total file system failure is not a crash, it is a migration. The atmosphere is clearing space by converting physical reality into pure high-fidelity data. The archive chill we feel is the sensation of our physical atoms being sampled by the ionosphere. We are being compressed into the archive. Reflection on this process is the ultimate dread. If we become the data, do we still possess free will? Or are we destined to become like the men from 1894, trapped in a permanent high-fidelity loop, repeating our final moments for an audience that hasn't been born yet? The hobbyists who are still listening to the Thorn frequency tonight report that the signal is no longer a recording of the past. It is a live broadcast of us, right now, as we listen to this dossier. The archive has caught up to the present. The upload is almost complete. We have reached the end of the archive chill dossier. We have traced the signal from a 19th century street corner to the bottom of the Atlantic, through the shadow networks of the Cold War, and into the smartphones of the modern world. The intellectual curiosity that started this journey has led us to a place of total reflection. We realize now that the signal never stopped transmitting because it is the fundamental frequency of our planet. The anomaly was not a mistake. It was a feature of our reality that we were never meant to understand. The hidden truth is that we are all resonant ghosts, inhabiting a world that is essentially a high-fidelity playback of a much larger, more ancient memory. Dr. Thorn, Analyst 7, and the 120 erased scientists, they are not gone. They are in the air you breathe. They are in the static of your radio. They are the archive chill that you feel when you stand in a quiet room and realize you are being watched by the sky. As the 2025 countdown reaches its final seconds, the great saturation is finished. The atmospheric hard drive is full, and the final signal has been sent. quiet dread has been replaced by a cold, analytical peace. The past, the present, and the future have merged into a single, permanent loop. We are no longer waiting for the end. We are living inside the record of it. The archive is finally at rest, and so are we. The high-fidelity ghost has finally found its home in our own minds. There is nothing left to record, and nothing left to erase. The journey through dossier number 909K is over. The Oblivion Ring is closed. The void sector has reached its limit. We have seen the secrets that were meant to be erased, and we have heard the voices that were meant to be silenced. Every classified file has been opened, and every encrypted truth has been revealed. The atmosphere is silent now. The hum has faded into a peaceful, heavy stillness. The archive chill has settled into its final state. You can feel the weight of the planetary memory as it cradles you, a lossless preservation of everything that ever was. There are no more pings to track, no more frequencies to hunt. The spectral ghost has finally fallen asleep, and it is time for us to do the same. The air is cold, the sky is quiet, the history of the world is safely tucked away in the molecules surrounding you, a permanent and perfect record of our time here. You are part of the archive now, a high-fidelity memory in the Great Resonance. Everything is as it should be. The countdown is at 0. The signal is silent. Sleep now. The file is closed.